welcome to Wifi Cloud training videos. In today's video, we are going to understand more about login policies that can be configured in Wifi. So a login policy basically are the set of restrictions that you can enforce on the user when the user connects to your networks. To access the login policies, you have to click on Authentication, Login Policies, and then you will get the list of all the login policies configured in the system. You can edit an existing policy or create a new policy by clicking on the New Policy tab. Similar to that, if you want to delete a policy, you can click on the Delete button. Please note that the policy should not be associated with any portal before you can delete it. The reason is because there would be users and portals which would be assigned to this particular policy, in which case the deletion of the policy is not allowed. So let's look at how to create a new policy. Click on the New Policy tab, and here you will get to enter a lot of details about the policy. Let's look at each of these fields one by one. The policy name is just a simple friendly name for that particular policy. The concurrency limit will define the concurrency that the users will be enforced when they connect using this particular policy. For example, if a particular user is assigned to the student policy and the concurrency limit is set to 2, it means that only 2 devices for that particular user will be allowed to concurrently access the network at a given point of time. So if the user is having a username, let's say John, and some user is trying to log in from multiple devices using the user ID John, then only 2 devices will be allowed to be online at a given point of time based on the concurrency policy. If you want to provide unlimited logins for that particular user, then you can set this policy to empty. The max device limit will define how many total devices that can be used by the user or can be registered by that user in the network. So the difference between the max device and the concurrency limit is that the max device will allow are the total number of users, whereas the concurrency are the online users. So generally speaking, if you want to limit the amount of devices a particular user wants to use, you set the max device limit for that user. The daily session count will basically tell how many total sessions that the user will be allowed to use or create on a particular day. Generally, this field is not used. The session timeout will be the timeout for a particular session for that user. The session timeout will define how long the user can stay online in a particular session. For example, if you want the users to not use the network for more than 120 minutes, then you can set the session timeout as 120 minutes. So the user will automatically logged out after 120 minutes on the network. The idle timeout will define again a limit or a timeout after which the user will be logged out if the user's device is idle. The daily time quota will define how much time the user will get in a day on the internet. So for example, if you want to create a policy where you give 30 minutes of online time for that user, then you can define 30 minutes as the daily time quota. The user's quota will automatically get reset at the midnight on the following day. The total time quota will define how much total time the user is allowed to use the network. The difference between total and daily is total is the cumulative time for that particular user sessions. So if you put in a total time quota of 10 hours, for example, then user will be allowed to use the network for 10 hours, after which the user will have to recharge or renew his account. The daily bandwidth quota will allow you to define how much is the total bandwidth consumption that the user can do in a particular day. Again, 24 hours from the midnight to midnight. So again, if you want to create a particular policy for a user that user is allowed to use 100 MB of data, upload and download together in a day, then you have to define the daily bandwidth quota. The total bandwidth quota will define the total data that the user can use before recharge for various sessions that he will have on the network. The download rate and upload rate will define the speed of the connection. So when the user logs in, the download rate will define the speed at which the user can browse on the network. The FUP stands for fair usage policy. The fair usage policy is basically a policy whereby the user will automatically get a degraded download and upload rate after a certain day quota or certain bandwidth consumption has taken place per day. So for example, if you want to set up a policy where the user should automatically be reduced uh, to 1 Mbps after consuming 100 MB of data, then you define the fair usage policy. Please note that this particular feature will work only with Wi-Fi software or Indio network devices. The validity interval will define the total number of days the user record will be active in the system. The validity interval is very important if you want to put a particular time limit for the user to use that particular quota or the sessions. So for example, if you want to create a policy whereby the user is allowed to use 1 GB of data, and you want to restrict the user to use it within, let's say, 30 days, then you will have to define the validity interval of 30 days. Auto renewal is basically a checkbox that is only valid for free users. So the idea here is that the free users, if you have specified a validity interval of 1 day, and the user will expire after 1 day and will not be allowed to use the system again. But if you check the auto renewal option, then the user will automatically get renewed after 1 day of usage. Is default is basically the policy, whether it is a default policy to be applied, and then the filter ID is a ID that you need to define in the system for devices like Meraki, Cisco, which uses the filter ID for defining the group policies in their respective controllers. You will have to refer to the respective vendors documentation before using this filter ID feature. So with this, you will be able to create a policy as per your requirements. And then once the policy is created, it will get listed in the list policies section. Now to use this policy, you will have to go to the captive portal section. And under the captive portal, if you click on any of the captive portal and edit it, you will, under login methods, you go to a particular section where that particular policy can be applied. So for example, we are having this complimentary free access captive portal. Here you get an option to select that particular policy that you have just defined. So whichever policy you have defined can be selected from the drop down list here. And once that policy is applied to this captive portal, all the users who are connecting through this captive portal using this particular login method will get the restrictions enforced by this particular policy. Please note that you can define different policies for different types of login methods. So for example, for complimentary free access, you can have a particular policy, and then free access with a password, or for SMS OTP login method, you can define a different policy. So this will give you the flexibility of defining different rules for different types of users and when they connect through the system. So with this, this completes the login policy introduction of YOS Cloud. For more videos, please check our YouTube channel. Thank you so much.